The dawning of a new day. In the beginning was the Word. The Word led to physical masterpieces, where candles shone bright, and would continue to burn aglow. Churches, chapels, temples, synagogues. Places for prayer, faith, hope, and of course, love. Worship places are a central point of life's journey. That is, to honor God, the divine. I love Niagara.
I have a question for you. What do you know about Niagara?
It has a really big falls.
I have a question for you. Do you like history?
So let me ask you, is that a rhetorical question?
Niagara, it's more than just the falls. It's rich in history and wine.
Okay, so we were talking about the more obscure places in Niagara. Some of the coolest history is not even in Niagara Falls.
Historical Niagara rocks!
What else do you have to say for yourself?
Good morning, I'm Donald, and I'm all about history.
And I'm all about the base. The base. If you're born, raised, or visit Niagara, you're always from Niagara. One of the greatest places on Earth. Welcome to this episode of Historical Niagara as we explore some of the most historical churches across the Niagara region. Not only are they the most historical in the Niagara region, but they're historical across Ontario and all of Canada. You see, some of these churches actually predate the War of 1812. That is, some of the first settlers, not only to the Niagara region and Ontario, but all of Canada settled in this area. And they say oftentimes, where roots are started, great churches begin. So, watch as we explore some of these holy masterpieces, the best way that I can put them, as they have their iconic steeples, beautiful stained glass windows, and histories in these churches that people still keep strong today.
In 1790s, three of the founders of the town decided a church was needed in Niagara. So they wrote to the bishop, who happened to be living in Nova Scotia, and they requested that a priest be sent by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. So in 1791, Robert Addison set out from England for Canada. He arrived in Quebec. It was winter, so he decided he would stay the winter in Quebec and proceed to Niagara in the spring. So in July of 1792, Robert Addison arrived as missionary and minister to Niagara and began the Congregation of St. Mark. He was here till his death in 1829. We know that Addison was a chaplain to the military, and we know that he conducted Brock's funeral. We also could assume safely that he knew Brock, because Addison was a member of the educated class and would have been one of the high and important people in town. And Addison was buried here in 1829. I think, important because it's the only building in the town of Niagara that survived the fire of 1813. It's significant in that it is acoustically perfect. So there are many concerts and recording artists working in St. Mark's. It is also significant because this is the finest collection of glass in the province of Ontario. The oldest window above the altar dates from 1839 or thereabouts, and it's the only one of this sort left in the province. Then in 1890, the galleries in the church were removed, and it was decided that it would be a good idea to add some colored glass in order to temper the light. So the two windows directly behind me were the first two. The one of the resurrection scene is considered a national treasure. The glass is from Tiffany, although Tiffany did not make it. All of the glass in the church, except one, were made by McCausland's of Toronto. They span the period of 1840 to the 1960s, so we have a kind of history of glass in Ontario. In 2000, the Archives Committee of St. Mark's began a series of publications about the history and the people of St. Mark's. Fred Habermal and I have edited and produced about 15 books on the subject of St. Mark's, beginning with this one, The History of the Parish, and the Women of the Parish, and letters and volumes belonging to Addison, and stories of the people of St. Mark's. These books are all available by contact with the church office of St. Mark. One of the important people buried in the cemetery is Mr. Cowan. Mr. Cowan came from Scotland to Mount Vernon to be the landscape architect for George Washington at his home. And this was kind of before the American Revolution, and as the Revolution proceeded, George Washington said to Mr. Cowan, "You really don't want to stay here, do you?" And Cowan said, "No, I prefer to remain under the flag of Britain." So Washington paid for his safe transport to Ontario, and he died on his ship in Lake Erie, and his body was brought here and buried. When Addison came in 1792, he brought with him a library. It was a library of 1,500 volumes. Now, it's singularly strange that an ordinary priest would have such an extensive library, because at that point, St. Paul's Cathedral in London had a library of 800 volumes and considered it extensive and important. So this was the most important library to come probably into Canada ever. It remains the property of St. Mark's and is housed in this specially built room, which is weather-proofed and proofed as far as climate control is concerned. The 1,500 volumes were originally in Addison's house, which was Lake Lodge, about 5 kilometers from town. So in the War of 1812, when everything else was burned to the ground, Addison's house remained safe and the books remained safe. In addition to the 1,500 volumes, Addison also had in the collection 2 manuscripts which have survived. This one is of special interest to us. It is all handwritten, very, very many words to the page because paper was very expensive. It's a series of 10 sermons, and it's especially interesting because one of the sermons says at Halifax, another one says at Cornwallis, and 3 more say at sea, which suggests that whoever wrote these sermons had been in Canada prior to 1790.
Initially, there was a church at the corner of what is now York Road and the Parkway, It was a multi-denominational church at the time. It was in the late 1700s. And it originally was Methodist, but then because it was the only church in the area, all denominations came to it and worshiped there. That church was destroyed by lightning and a fire, and this church was founded and started to be built in 1877. Between the time that the church on York Road was destroyed, which would be in the early 1800s, and this church being founded, they worshipped in people's houses in the village. And so that was how the church worked in the village. Initially, when it was decided to build this facility, it became an Anglican church. It was started in 1877 and completed in 1879, this particular building. And I have the figure here, it's fascinating here. The total cost, which included a fence, was $2,542.92 in 1877. And since $400 was still owing and there was to be no debt on the church, some of the parishioners covered the debt so that the church would be consecrated. So in 1879 it was consecrated. The name was changed to St. Saviour the Brock Memorial Church. Some of the people in the village provided the land, 3 acres. Originally, Brock's family was asked to help fund the church, but they couldn't. They offered 200 acres of land. What we have here is a church that has been a village church, truly, for as long as I've been around here, and it has been a village church long before I came here, long before we moved down here to Queenston. So I try to get the people in the village to be part of the church, even though they may not want to be worshiping members. The window that we're looking at here is unusual in a church because it honors the memory of a child. You will see stained glass windows in churches in memory of children, but they're very rare. This is in memory of Robert Charles Chilton Newburn. He was born in 1850 and he died in 1854. And there's very little information about him as a child. And we don't know where he's buried because there is no cemetery here. But the window is in memory of him. So we have a group called the Friends of St. Saviour's. And they support us as they can with donations at times, but also moral support, and when we are able to have dinners and that type of thing, they support us. So we really are a village church. We are here in Queenston. We honor the memory of General Brock, but we honor the memory of every single person who has ever worked.
One of the main things that you want to find are the vital records, meaning the marriages, the baptisms, the burials. In Ontario, those vital registrations did not start until 1869. So in order to find those records that you need in order to keep going backwards as you're tracing your ancestry, you have to go through churches. You have to find the church records and look through them and try to find those events, because of course the baptisms will give you the parents' names, the marriages will give you sometimes the parents' names depending on the year, and the burials, they will sometimes give a spouse name, but at least it gives you dates and it gives you more clues to keep going backwards. So yeah, church records, extremely important and rather difficult to find in Ontario because they're scattered everywhere. They're not all kept in central places.
The monastery of Mount Carmel was built in 2 pieces, the first being finished in 1911 and the chapel and the southern wing, in which you are now, in 1926. But the Carmelites came here in 1875. Their first building residence was across the street where the parking lot is, where they ministered to at Our Lady of Peace. And then they built this monastery as a hospice, which doesn't mean what it means nowadays in terms of hospice care, but simply meant a retreat center for spiritual refreshment. As we gained vocations, this building was the best one to house our students, so it became a minor seminary with high school seminarians and college as well. Then there was a fire in 1967, just when they were trying to get the college accredited, to get accreditation for the college. That changed the history of the building, where the minor seminary operated for about another 10 or 15 years, and then it has gone back to being a retreat center with kind of an ecumenical, interfaith openness, where groups of different backgrounds religiously, some Catholic, but others Christian, and others even world religions, come here to use our facilities for retreats. Saint Therese of Lisieux is undoubtedly the most popular saint of the last century, and people are still very devoted to her. When the chapel was built in 1926, she had just been named a saint in 1925. So the statue behind me is probably one of the first done of her as a saint. The Society of the Little Flower has been our fundraising arm to support our seminarians and missions for decades. In, I think, 1980, Bishop O'Mara named this building the Shrine to Saint Therese, where we have 4 relics of Therese, with a reliquary that matches other shrines throughout the world, coming from Lisieux, from what I'm told. The shrine is very popular, especially at the end of September, when we have a celebration for her feast day on the final Saturday. The actual feast day itself, October 1st, is also a very popular day where people come to visit. But her devotees come year-round and often leave flowers as a sign of thankfulness for prayers they believe have been answered at her intercession. The beauty of our chapel is enhanced by the closeness to natural beauty. The beauty of the falls was something that Titus Brandsma, one of our Carmelites from the Netherlands, wrote about when he came here in 1935, about the magnificence of the water, just drawing one in to the all-powerful, creative power of God. Our chapel here is a human beauty whose stained glass brights up the room, and the carvings done by a single man are simple, elegant, and yet draw one into a prayerful and meditative place. Much like I hope that if one is at the falls in an early morning and a sunrise, one can be drawn into that quiet, breathtaking beauty of creation.
This used to be the Central United Church. If I remember correctly, it was built in 1913. This was the main church part over here, and at one point in time, the other side actually burnt down and was rebuilt. Sure, this would have been the area that had the main congregations. The floor used to be slanted downwards. All the pews were in here. This is all the original leaded and stained glass. We haven't changed any of that out. The pipe organ was brought in a few years after the church was built. Since we purchased the property 4 years ago, we've had it refurbished, so it's now fully functional again, which is really cool when it's planned. It fills this whole space. As you have probably have seen downstairs, there is an entertainment complex. It's attached to the bar. That used to be a gymnasium. Actually, when we moved in, there was basketball courts. It was pretty beat up, and there was also a boxing club there at one time. The church had a kitchen in it. We changed all that out, and it was your typical church kitchen, a giant steam table down the middle, That was all taken out, and we put in a kitchen so that we're able to actually have a restaurant there. The other space that's now an art gallery and community area was Sunday school room. So there was 13 of them. We've left all the plaques on all the doors. So if you look at them, you can tell what room was donated by whom. There's actually 2 pianos in the building too that have been donated. They all have their plaques on it. We tried to keep as much of the history of the building as we could, as we, tried to bring it back up to a condition where it was good for public use, we'll say. We've had the building for 4 years now. We are currently trying to keep it as a community hub. We do community holiday dinners where we feed 200 people from local food banks. We run the Mother's Day Walk for Breast Cancer Research. We do drag shows. We do rock concerts. We do a lot of tribute acts. We do things, kids karaoke on Friday nights, totally free. Kids come over, they do karaoke on that big stage, full sound, full lights. They're like little rock stars. It's very cool. We do things like line dancing. And if you're a community group and you need some place to meet, as long as you don't make any money, you are welcome to the space. You just call us up, we'll arrange a time, and you can come have a meeting or a social get-together, as long as it's a positive impact on the community.
(1841) is when the church was established, and it was Mr. Ball, who owned the big area around here, Ball's Falls. He donated the land, and the church is built on the Gothic type design, and the interior has been done a little bit for reinforcements over the year, and put a new roof on. All the windows have all been reglazed, and it cost $10,000 per window, and that was done about 4 or 5 years ago. And the church is kept up. We have about on the register, I think we have about 80 people. About 30 to 40 come to church every Sunday, except for right now when we're under lock and key. That we have we're allowed a maximum of 24, and we've been getting about 14 or 15 each Sunday. So it's a nice little church, nice little country church, and it was built in 1841. It means history, stabilization of the faith, since we're here for so long, and we also help out the community in donations for Christmas and that for the people that are needy. We have a food drive every week that people can bring food, and when the bin gets full, we give it to the Village of Hope down at the bottom of the hill there, the old school, which supports the people of need in the area.
In 1864 in Hannon, Ontario, which is now located within the city limits of Hamilton. It was an Anglican church and very classic of a early settler Anglican church. It's very simple, yet did have the stained glass windows, which is very traditional in the Anglican churches. This was St. George's Anglican Church, which outgrew this church building, and a new church was constructed on its site. The church building here was decommissioned and vacant for quite a few years until it was purchased and then brought over here to Balls Falls in 1974 by the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. Today it is a decommissioned chapel where it is used for weddings as well as for school programs where students can learn about early settler life.
Well, this church, or this parish, I should say, was founded in 1794 by obviously early settlers in the area. We still have descendants of that family, of those families in the parish today. This building we're in now is the third building on the site. This building was 200 years old last year, so it was completed in 1819. The first parish priest arrived here in 1815, I believe, William Sampson, who died tragically of a hunting accident after he arrived here. But it was founded to serve the Anglican settlers of the town of Grimsby, which has a very old municipal history as well, not just church history. So it's an old community served by an old church, and served very faithfully and very well. We're in the church, and it looks essentially as it did in the late 1800s. I think the oldest photograph I've seen is from maybe 1880, 1870. And it looks very much like this. The pews, the beautiful ceiling, the altar and the choir stalls are all quite old, I'd say back to the mid-19th century anyway. And we've had some pressure at times to change things, but it works very well as a space and as a worship space. And so we want to keep the pulpit, we want to keep the pews, and not for old time's sake, but just to know that we're in touch with where we've come from, and hopefully that can help us get to where we want to go in the present age. Okay. The stained glass windows are dedicated to parishioners from times past, and they are a very nice selection of classical Ontario, basically made in Ontario stained glass. Different manufacturers are represented. As you can see, there are different styles throughout, and they're lovely. And they've been historically cataloged and tell the story of the parish, through the individuals for whom they're dedicated. But today, for instance, it becomes symbolic of a revealed strength to the community. We have been ringing the bell, although we haven't been doing it lately. We've been ringing the church bell during COVID-19 on Sunday evenings. And I was really very moved and surprised by how many folks found that helpful to them during this uncertain time, during this time of anxiety. But obviously we want to offer the gospel of Jesus Christ in a contemporary fashion that speaks to the issues of the day. We are obviously surrounded and immersed in tensions and the anxieties, the election down south, and our own checkered history of relationships with Indigenous people. That's very important in our area in Niagara. So we are hoping to meet the challenges of today with some sense of living contact with the past, which makes us strong, I think. Well, the cemetery is one of the oldest in Ontario. The first published poet in Ontario was buried here, and many of the rectors from times past are buried here. William Sampson, of whom I was just speaking, he's buried here as well. We have 125, I think it is, veterans of Canada's various wars here, the Boer War, First and Second World War, and veterans from 1812 buried here in the cemetery. So there's a very strong historical legacy here in our cemetery. It's still open, and we have services here regularly, mostly for our own church people, but over the centuries, and I mean centuries, 225 years, the families have spread out. So we have people coming from far and wide whose families have bought property here in the past.
Position here, I'm the abbot of this temple. I take care of this temple. And now we have two nuns, one old and one quite a young one, next door. So I'm the one here to run the show around the place. Well, there are two names for me. Before I become Buddhist monk, my name is Won San Su, right? So W-O-O-N-S-U-N, Won, that means to say wisdom, Sun, that means to say mountain. The word Su is a surname. Then when you become a monk, you change your name to the Buddhist monk, Shang Guang. That means to say a mirror, bright as a mirror. All right? The 7-story tower, what they call here, but back in the East we call 7-story pagoda in English. In Sanskrit, the language they use in India is called stupa. Why 7? Why not 8? Why not 10? It's the way of life of our people. According to our calendar, 7 days a week. Every day is a beautiful day, wonderful day, a lovely day. That's why 7-story tower, a pagoda, they call it. Right? This place was sailed in the year 1990. So the bidding going on left and right, you see. We are quite lucky, in fact very lucky. We bought it. It was a car lot. So after buying this piece of land, we started renovating. The building was built 1995 here. That one next door, 1993. So we are very fortunate that people help us have this building. So we wholeheartedly thankful of these people to help this out. In front of you and behind of me, the 2 statues. The one on the right is a lady form, the one on the right is a man form. The lady statue here represents the Goddess of Mercy. It's very compassionate, always help people wherever she can. And the one on the right is from the hell himself. Every religion have heaven and hell. Same Buddhism. If you do good, you go to heaven. If you go bad, you go to hell. See?
So there you have it, folks. The historical, iconic churches and worship centers across the Niagara region. If you are ever in the area, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, these places are definitely worth seeing. They are museums, if you'd like to call it, to our cultural pasts, and basically the first settlers that came not only to the Niagara region, but all of Canada, whether it be in Niagara Falls, Fort Erie, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Jordan, or Grimsby. Definitely get out to one of these churches and check them out. They are definitely breathtaking, and they hold on to our history as we go forward into our present and in our futures.